Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irene. I'm the host here, and my guest today is Will Chatlosh. Hi, Will.
Hello.
So, I stumbled on your account on Instagram, and somehow, I started from the very beginning, and it was all little crochet toys. So I was looking through it, and it was toys, 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 boom, portraits.
Yeah.
Tell me, what was your journey? How did you start crocheting, and how you ended up doing the freestyle crochet?
Yeah, so I started crocheting. I was about 12 years old, and throughout my childhood, I would say that I kind of cycled through various crafts and landed on crochet after a few of my family members bought me some loom knitting, like a kit sort of for Christmas one year. And that was sort of my first introduction to fiber art. After that, I taught myself to crochet using YouTube tutorials, and I didn't really understand how to read a pattern at all or anything like that. But I somehow learned and began crocheting animals for like 6 or 7 years. As I grew up, more and more people were always telling me to sell at farmers markets, sell at individual artist markets, sort of that sort of stuff. And selling my work was never super interesting to me because I was like 14 and just crocheting for fun, really. But as I grew up, I sort of made it more of a priority to start trying to design my own crocheted animals and stuff. And then in 2017, I met my best friend in high school, and we started crocheting together all the time, and we started selling at farmers markets, and we actually started our first Instagram page for crocheting as a sort of page for both of us back in 2017, and would just post both of our artworks and the crochet stuff that we were working on at the time. And after a while, I sort of decided to start my own Instagram account and post more regularly my own stuff. And it's definitely been a long process of learning how to take good pictures that are like well lit and making it look pleasing for everyone else. And it's been really awesome to grow an audience now. That I started crocheting portraits at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, when school kind of got canceled and I was just finishing my senior year of high school. So I had like a long summer ahead of me at that point, and had seen a few different artists on Instagram doing sort of freeform crochet. I've seen a few people who do sort of animal faces instead of portraits, but I just really wanted to try it for myself, because at this point I felt like I was confident with crocheting and knew how to read a pattern and understood stitches and how it all works. So I started crocheting portraits at the beginning of 2020, and now that's really what I do full time.
Well,
And
when you started crocheting portraits, were you following somebody else's patterns for that, or was it like all your freestyling?
It was honestly totally my freestyling. I get questions all the time asking people, or people asking me to create patterns for the portraits that I create. And I think it would take me hundreds and hundreds of hours just to try to be able to communicate what I'm doing every step of the way for any portrait that I make. My first reference image was just a random picture that I found on Pinterest, because I knew that with crochet, you can't really blend colors like you do with painting or drawing or something like that. So I needed a reference picture that had a sort of like color blocked face with individual color shapes in it. And that's the picture that I found on Pinterest. That was my first crochet portrait project. And then I sort of learned over time to edit pictures to be able to create those reference images myself and create shapes in the face and understand how to see shapes in the face to be able to crochet the color sections individually.
When you crochet a face, right, is there something that's most difficult for you, like to achieve the likeness of what you're trying to portray?
I definitely think there are challenges, and I am noticing one of them right now as I'm just trying to finish up one of the portraits I've been working on for a few months here. And that is just that it becomes hard to keep it all flat and the right size, simply because over time yarn does stretch and slowly bend and warp. Like it can be stretched out and kind of get stuck there. So I've had this project right here that I took a few days break from just because it becomes a little bit overwhelming at times. And having it like folded up for a few days sort of made it shrink just like probably about a ½ inch, but I'm always wanting to keep things as accurate as possible. So I've spent some time like laying it out on the table and stretching it and making sure it's close enough to the right size, if that makes sense.
When you crochet, what's in your head? Like, what are you thinking about? Are you like technically concentrating on the project? Are you daydreaming? Like, what's in that head of yours?
It takes a lot of focus, I would say. I used to be able to watch crochet and watch TV at the same time or something like that. Now I'm like totally focused, head in the game. Like I'll be listening to music, but I will say I don't usually think about the face as I'm crocheting it. I'm sort of looking at each of the individual shapes and thinking really hard about which shape I need to do first, which shape I need to do second, like the order with which I'm going to try to make the portrait happen. And then yeah, just the easiest way to crochet all of the shapes, because some of them can get super weird, especially in the eyes and the nose region. Like I usually start all of my portraits with the eyes because it's always got the most concentrated small shapes within the eyes, which can be kind of confusing and hard to pull off sometimes.
When you see a portrait that you want to recreate, right? Is in your mind, you're already breaking it up, like where you're going to start, how you're going to attach the next piece, like you see it like pixelated basically, like as steps of work, or do you see it in colors? Like how do you break it for yourself?
When I do decide on a reference image or something like that, I go into Adobe Illustrator, which is the program that I use to transform my pictures into the reference that I will have in the color scheme that I want with all of the shapes in the face already created. So I will say when I'm like coming up with a color scheme or something like that, I kind of just try a bunch of different options to see which I like. And then I think about what yarn colors I have available and try to make what I can do work. Just because it seems like even though I have a ton of yarn now at this point, every single project I'm buying new balls of yarn just because I never have the exact right color, if that makes sense.
Well, how did that collection started? Like, do you remember your first color that you worked with?
Honestly, I don't know. I've got so many now, and a lot of it really is just family and friends being like, hey, my best friend actually was trying to get rid of a bag of yarn, and so I decided that you might need some. And so I've really got like tons and tons of just unorganized bags like this. And I would say that's more so where my collection grows versus me actually going out and buying yarn. So I would say a lot of it, I really don't know where it's from, but I will say I get asked a lot of the time what sort of yarn that I use for my projects. And the answer really is just sort of like cheap craft store yarn, like the Red Heart worsted weight yarn, or sort of just Joanne Fabrics cheap worsted weight yarn really works great for me. And I think that's because it's something that I've been so used to using for my animal projects in the past and all of that.
When you see that computer, right, and looking at Adobe and thinking about like what colorways you're gonna use, like are those colors behind you inspire you? Like what gives you those ideas? What inspires you to choose the colors that you choose?
Honestly, I think most recently, because I've done, I would say like 6 or 7 portraits now, I'm trying to use colors that I haven't used in my previous portraits just to make it look sort of different. With color schemes, especially to be able to really recreate like the highlights and the shadows in the face, I know I've got to come up with a color scheme that's got like very light colors and values and then a very dark color or value with whatever color that I decide to choose.
Well, now you're in the fashion school, right?
Yes.
How is that influencing your choices? And do you see your work differently somehow, like from what you're learning now in school?
Totally, actually. I finished my second year of school. I'm attending like a local art school here in Grand Rapids, and Um, Throughout my experiences with learning how fashion works and creating and designing my own clothes, it's definitely been an interest for me simply because I've been crocheting for so long. And I have recently sort of been seeing my crocheted faces as a sheet of fabric. Like I can envision myself draping one of these faces over a person just because it is so large. It really could function as like a big square of fabric in the same way that you could use that fabric to sew a dress out of. I feel like at some point down the line, I could see myself using one of these faces and sewing it in just the right spots or sort of pinning it to be able to create a dress out of it. And that's something I definitely want to do in the future. Um, Obviously not much of the fashion that I've been learning so far is crochet related or dedicated to that, simply because we typically use like woven fabrics and that sort of stuff. But I have been continually trying to integrate crochet into open-ended projects that I've had in school. And I hope to be able to do so continuing throughout school here.
Well, this is like one way to use what you've done, right? Like you can incorporate it into some sort of garments and
Mhm.
make like statement pieces. Do you have
Totally.
any ambition of like being in a museum with just those portraits?
I really, I couldn't tell you what my plan is for the future. And that may be a bad thing, but I sort of see it as a good thing just because I think 2 or 3 years ago, I had no idea that I would be where I am now. So I'm not making any dead set plans for the future, although this portrait that I've been working on now is going to be sent to an exhibition in France. And I do hope to be able to exhibit some of my pieces in local museums or something like that would be super cool. Um, but also like selling them individually, even though I'm not doing like commissions or anything at the moment, simply because it takes me so long to do each individual portrait. I'd love to be able to sell some of them to people as well and just have them sort of spread out around the world and be able to continue to show people what I'm doing, because I really do love interacting with everyone who comes across my artwork here.
Well, when you see people like other artists who do similar style crochet to you, is that like a source of ideas, inspirations? Do you learn from them? Do you see it critically? Like, do you see what they do that you disagree with and you would do it differently? Like, how do you perceive other people's work?
That's a really great question. And I think everyone that I come across through Instagram and stuff like that, who does do sort of similar portrait crochet, everyone does have a very interesting and different way about going about making portraits using crochet. I would say there's probably like a small group of 5 to 10 people who I continually follow and see posting similar work to my own, but it definitely is different. And I'm not sure really how to explain it other than I do think my portraits tend to be pretty huge in comparison to some others. And um, I also feel like mine may be less realistic, or in the sense that I'm not always going for skin tone colors or accuracy of getting the eyelashes to look a certain way or the lips to look a certain way, in the same way that some other artists make that more their priority. And I wouldn't necessarily say that every single time I look at them, I'm like critiquing other artists' work, because I think the fact that people are capable of just taking a hook and some yarn and making a big face out of it is really impressive in itself. Um, Although I can see people totally critiquing my work in the sense that a lot of the time I'm not even really using real crochet stitches, or I really wouldn't be able to explain exactly where I'm re-adding a piece of yarn or creating a weird shape, which is why making a pattern for a portrait would be so incredibly difficult, because I'd have to like over explain what I'm doing just because it's not in any normal crochet patterns.
When you create like a little toy, right? It's sort of easy to price because I mean, it's a toy, you spend certain amount of hours, you spend certain amount in materials, you combine it and you decide on the price.
Yeah.
When it comes to something like portrait, it becomes like, is it craft or is it art, right? And
Yeah.
Do you have hard time pricing it?
It's really hard, and I've always had a hard time with it because I think when pricing a portrait like this, the cost of materials is pretty low just because I still stick to pretty cheap yarn. For the project that I'm using right now, I actually got some like hand dyed yarn from someone locally, which is really awesome. But thinking about prices for my pieces, it is mostly just time based, and it becomes really hard to record exactly the amount of time that I spend on these pieces because it sort of spans months. When I'm like in school, I'll like only work on it when I'm done with my work at the end of the night for a few hours, a few times a week. So if I'm only working on it 2 hours a night, like 3 days a week, over the course of like 7 weeks, it becomes really hard to like exactly measure how many days and hours I spent on it. Which is still something I'm trying to be conscious of. I try to keep lists in my phone of hours and dates and how much I work on it. But yeah, I would say that pricing is definitely much more difficult than pricing small animals or toys like that.
Well, where do you see yourself? Like, are you an artist or a crafter?
That's a really great question as well. And I don't really know, because I think I agree with you in the sense that crocheting animals is more of a craft than an art form. But I do think that this is more of an art in that it's seen totally differently. I think that this I would consider art in the sense that it's more connected to the other work that I'm doing in school, such as like portrait drawing or creating garments in the fashion world and that sort of stuff. But there is definitely a line at some point, and I'm still trying to figure out where that is, I think.
And like the reason for my question, because like when you draw something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't calculate how many hours it took you to draw something. You would
Right.
price it based on like what you feel like is a fair amount for
Mm-hmm.
the amount of ideas you put into that painting.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to crocheting, it's just as impressive, but yet we like tend to treat it like as a craft and like we have to go by the hour, right?
That is very true. And that is one thing I was going to say is it kind of, I think, because it is so difficult to keep track of the time that I spend on this, I can see myself pricing these in the future as a very just sort of the idea of it, or like how other artists price their work. Just because I don't think I'll ever really have a true gauge of how much time I spend on any of my pieces. I think just what feels right may be what I'm going to price things for, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, like when people think about crochet, they're thinking about like granny squares, blankets, some like maybe summer tops, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do people close to you ever ask you like, why won't you just make something wearable? Like, why go into this whole complicated world of art?
I don't know. I really do think that there are so many styles of crochet, and they're all so different that I like really do appreciate all of them. I know that in a lot of ways, something like making granny squares and creating a blanket out of it may be simpler or just different, really. But I still really love seeing people do that. And yeah, I don't know. And I think I just get so caught in my own lane that I like don't really realize how many other types of crochet there are and what I could be doing as well.
I mean, like, so now you're working on a portrait, right? You've been working on it for months, and I would love for you to show it in a second.
Oh, yeah.
But do you still do other projects? Do you still do those toys occasionally? Like, is there ever time when you just like need a break from the art and go back into something little that brings you joy?
Oh, definitely. I think like just this past week, I sort of hit a block where I just get sick of looking at this and need a few days off. And still, for a lot of my family's birthdays or for friends, I'll crochet little animals as a gift to give to them. Or if I see like a really cool pattern online for a new animal that I have not seen or I think is really awesome, I'd love to like sit down and follow it. I definitely still crochet animals when I can, but this is more so drilled in my mind that I need to be working on this if I'm sitting down to crochet, unless I have like a reason, like a birthday, to be making animals or something.
I mean, are you very self-disciplined in general?
I think so. And I think for some reason, it's really drilled into me internally that I need to be productive during the day. So I somehow have the capability to just turn off all the TVs and put in my music and sit down and work on this, because I feel like just getting home and going to bed is like giving up when there's work to be done on this portrait, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, talking of productivity, right? I feel like when you think about a portrait, there's like a lot of steps to it. So you have to find the portrait. You have to see how to break it into colors. You have to plan which part you're going to start.
Yeah.
Then there's this whole production of it, right? How much time do you spend on preparing to start the project versus like actually making that project happen?
I would have to say maybe 5-ish hours go into taking an image and transforming it digitally into a color scheme that I think would look good. And then sort of just thinking hard about it, mapping it out and gathering my supplies, which if I already have the colors makes things pretty easy for me. But I think throughout my process, I do spend a lot of time just like looking back at the big picture and thinking about exactly the steps that I need to take in order to get there. So when I do decide to finally start crocheting after I get everything set up, I'll sort of like take a look and think really hard about where exactly I need to start in order to make the steps of creating the entire portrait the easiest for me.
Well, I mean, so how do you decide which portrait you're going to make? Like what draws you to certain face?
That's a really great question as well. I have recently, in order to create crocheted portraits, been looking more on like fashion magazines on Instagram or like style magazines to try to find sort of compelling images that I like, versus being trapped in the world of just crocheting celebrities or something like that, which I know a lot of people ask me to do David Bowie a lot or Ariana Grande or something like that, because when people know the face, I think it would get more recognition, but that's not necessarily what I'm focused on. I think I'm more interested in bringing to life the faces of people that aren't already famous, or just that people don't have opinions about already, if that makes sense. So I've done myself and my mom and just some other random images. This one that I'm working on right now is sort of in collaboration with another fiber artist on Instagram, who I think you've actually interviewed here.
Yeah.
Her name is Rianne, I do believe. And this piece I'm sending to exhibit in her space in France, hopefully in the fall, if that's still on. And she is curating work from many different artists like myself, based on the faces of dead people or images that she found that have existed for a long time. And these people aren't famous or anything like that. They're just random faces. And I sort of like chose the picture that I thought was most interesting out of the ones that she sent me. And so that's
what made it interesting for you? Because like she was telling in her interview, she was telling about like finding those photographs, and she's like, at first I thought, oh, I want to pick first because like she found those pictures, right? But then she was like, that's not fair, so let me send it to everybody else and let them choose what they want to work on. So what made you choose that specific picture?
I'm really not sure. I think the fact that it was like really head on and sort of symmetrical in that sense, but like not quite symmetrical, sort of drew my attention over some of the other pictures, which I felt more looked like posed as if someone could have just taken it on a phone or something like that.
Can you show us that picture that you're working on?
Yeah, I've currently got it right here on top of my computer. I'm so close to finishing it. I'm so excited to say. Hopefully by the time this interview goes up, it'll be done. but I've got it here and it's pretty huge,
It
but
is.
this is it. I'm just now sort of trying to get the bottom of it all complete, which is what I was doing last night actually. But I always say it's pretty hard to gauge the size of these things in my Instagram posts. So I'm excited to be like holding it up and to be able to show everyone. And hopefully I'll be having some more posts come out soon, now that this thing is so close to being complete.
How heavy it is?
Really not that heavy. I would say it's just about like a blanket, just in the sense of like a granny square crocheted blanket or anything else like that. Just sort of a piece of fabric, not super heavy, but it is kind of awkward to hold up.
When you work with it, do you have like, how many hours per day do you work on it?
I think when I do sit down to work on it at the end of the day, it's usually anywhere between 2 and 4 hours at a time. And a lot of it is I'll work really hard for a few minutes and then I'll like take a step back and just think and look and listen to my music and then reconsider what I've got to do. So it's not like I'm actually sitting down crocheting constantly. As you may be making an animal, you're just going in rows around. I've got to like sort of cut and rejoin the yarn all the time, so I get to stop and think about what I'm doing. Yeah, just for like 2 or 3 hours a day.
How did it feel to make your own portrait or a portrait of your mom? Like when it's somebody that you know close and intimately, like how is it different from making a face that you've never met?
I think kind of like looking back on it, it's a little bit weird, but while I'm crocheting, I'm not really thinking about the face as much as I am like the individual shapes. So I'm not constantly really considering that I've been looking at my mom's face for 65 hours now, just crocheting it. But now that I have got a stack of my face and my mom and some other people, it's just like, it is a little weird to sort of sit back and look. Especially because I did this portrait of my mom here, I'll grab it real quick, which I did actually sort of in collaboration with Joanne Fabrics, which reached out to me on Instagram and asked me to do a crocheted portrait sort of for their spring campaign. And now that it's been used in some of their like marketing and stuff, it is funny to see like my mom's face in Joanne's Fabrics marketing, if that makes sense. So I've got this portrait here, which is my mother with a sort of flower on her face. And it was really cool that we kind of just sat down and took this picture one day, and now it's become this whole thing and it's all over online and all that stuff.
Well, what was her reaction when she saw the finished product?
I think she's very happy and really loves to be able to show her friends that this is what I've been doing lately. I'm sure she does feel a little bit weird that it's her face all over everything as well, but you know, she's got to deal with me somehow.
I mean, when you do you have any ambitions of teaching others how to do it, how to make portraits your way?
I think hopefully in the near future here. I've had a hard time getting a website set up, and I know I get asked about that all of the time, but I know that I do hope to be able to set up sort of online meetings with people and spend an hour talking about my process really intensely and showing some videos of getting started, rejoining the yarn, teaching like all of the individual techniques that you need to know more for portrait crochet than other crochet. And my advice is always just to tell people to just go for it, because I think that's really the only reason that I got started as well, is because I had some time to myself and decided to try something that I hadn't before.
I mean, like you're full-time in school, and I'm sure there are like projects that take you a lot of time because it's fashion school, so it's hands-on. You have to like do the draping, do the sewing, all that things, right?
Yeah.
Do you see crocheting as your hobby? Do you see it as your like equal career occupation?
I do sort of see it as a hobby in the sense that it is a lot of the time very separate from school, because when I am in the thick of it in the spring semester, especially studying fashion, I have more so structured projects throughout the semester versus assignments or exams or anything like that. So a lot of the time I am working on my projects at home or outside of school. and don't have time to crochet for like a long time or a few weeks at a time. So it does feel like a hobby in that sense, that it's like sort of a side project to school. But I did get the opportunity this past semester to crochet a dress and cape as one of my assignments for school using plastic shopping bags from like a grocery store. We had a recycling based project for one of my fashion classes where we were only allowed to use recycled materials to create an outfit. And so I had seen people use grocery bags as yarn before. And so I decided to give that a try. And that was sort of one of the first times that my school and this hobby mixed, and I was really happy with how it came out. I didn't really post on Instagram about it at all, but this is still something that I've been able to show people and I've got at school still, I think. But that is one thing that I hope to integrate into portraits in the future as well, is making recycled portraits, which I think would be super cool if I was able to make yarn out of these plastic bags once again and possibly dye them different colors or something like that to be able to create entirely recycled portraits.
Do you crochet in public?
Not really. It is one of those things where I have to totally be in the zone, alone in my basement. Here I am, just by myself, really focused at the end of the day. I'm usually, I would say I'm a night owl for sure. So I'm up super late at night because I get the most done when everyone else is asleep and I can just be alone and focus.
Well, you know how people like often make fun and say like, "Oh, you're being grandma, you know, only grandma
Yeah.
crochet." Have anybody ever given you hard time over the fact that you're crocheting?
I honestly really no. However, I will say growing up being a 13-year-old boy who crochets in his free time was definitely not something I shared with any of my classmates throughout public school at all until I was really at the end of high school and sort of just had to embrace it because I didn't want to be seen as weird when all of the other teenage boys are out playing basketball or joining sports teams for school or really just not crocheting at all, because I guess kids at that age do definitely view it as more of like a grandma hobby. But I'm glad I stuck with it, even if I wasn't really able to share it with that many people growing up.
Well, if there is a boy who is 13 right now listening to this interview, what would be your advice to him?
My advice is always just to keep going. I really love seeing that crocheting has become more of a young person thing for sure, especially through TikTok. I see a lot of young people crocheting and it's really, I think, taking off again for sure. And just know that, like, I guess I did it. If that means anything, you're not alone in the sense that if you're a 13-year-old boy crocheting, you better keep doing it.
Well, talking of social media, what social media means to you? How much time you spend there? Is it ever frustrating that you post something and you hope it's gonna go viral and it doesn't? Like,
Totally. And I think it's at the point for me where I care too much, really. I spend so much time taking pictures and editing my pictures. I honestly do a lot of colored backgrounds for my Instagram, and it's not professional at all. I really use construction paper and lay it all out on the ground and then spend some time editing all of the edges of the paper out and all that stuff. And I know that my Instagram has really taken off pretty recently, and it's really been insane to see, especially since I've now been doing it for 5 years or so, and I've just learned so much. It feels like such a good reward to be seeing more people from putting in more work. But I always catch myself needing to take a step back because it really is just Instagram, and it's not like a full-time job or anything, even if it feels like it. But I think I have the same drive for social media that I do just for crocheting in general, in that I feel really connected to it. And it's one of those things at the end of the day where I just need to sit down and do it, just like crocheting. And that's why I'm still committed to posting. And I think people really like seeing creative pictures and all of that stuff, which really makes me happy as well.
when you're scrolling through, let's say, Instagram or TikTok feed, what would stop you in your tracks and make you pay attention to what's going on that screen?
Unique crafts always catch me on TikTok, and I've really wanted to be able to share my art on TikTok again. I know I posted sort of at the beginning of the pandemic again, and I had one video blow up and it kind of scared me so bad I never posted again, but I'm still on TikTok. And whenever I do see people creating insane art out of just random things, which really happens a lot on there, it does definitely catch my eye. And I think that people who aren't super familiar with crochet or anything don't know that crocheting portraits is even a thing. So I'm hoping to be able to share that on there and show people that you can take a ball of yarn and make a face out of it somehow and get more people into crocheting that way as well.
Do you think you need to be an artist to do that? Like, do you think, like, in order for your portrait to look somewhat resembling the one that you started with, you need to be an artist?
Definitely not. I think in that sense, I'm more logically driven because my portraits always tend to turn out just about exactly as my edited image looks. And I think that is more just me being an absolute insane perfectionist slash following the rules like crazy, all of that sort of stuff. So I don't think it takes like an artistic eye to be able to make it look good. I think it sort of takes more just like absolute focus and stuff like that.
Well, talking of being a perfectionist, like when you look back at your first portrait, what do you see? Like, do you think it's still perfect?
I definitely don't think it's perfect. And that is funny to say, but I still think it looks good and it turned out all right for being my first one for sure. But I'm definitely still learning as I go with every portrait that I crochet. I think some of my more recent ones are tending to have more of a strict style to it just because I'm more comfortable with doing the same process for all of my portraits. But I do know, I think I would totally do the first one that I crocheted very differently than I did when I first did it. I did this one sort of last year, and this is one of the smaller ones that I've done. And this is also just a sort of reference image that I found on Pinterest. And I think it turned out quite right, like really good. And I'm very happy with how it looks still. But this is another one where I think I would just do a lot of things differently because it was one of the first ones that I've done and I didn't have nearly as much experience as well. Yeah.
Well, when you work on a project, are you a one project guy or do you have like a few projects going at the same time?
I would say I'm kind of one project at a time. The first one that I showed here, the red and blue one, is pretty much just about the only portrait that I've been working on for a long time. And it started off as a project for school as well, actually. Our final project was a fiber art project, and I decided to sort of mix the two, crocheting and school once again, to crochet a portrait as my fiber art project for my school final this spring. And I certainly didn't come close to finishing this portrait. Clearly it's not even done now, but I sort of started it and sewed what I had to a canvas to make it look kind of cool to turn in for school. And when I got it back, I just kept working on it. But in that time, where I had it turned in for school and was sort of finishing my other projects, I did start another portrait that I can show here because I have not shown it at all yet. But other than that, it's sort of just been one portrait at a time. This is one portrait that I found using fashion magazines on Instagram. So this is like just some sort of model that really doesn't have any significance as well. It's just a photo that I found compelling for some reason and decided to crochet. So this is the one that I'm planning on working on as soon as I'm finished with this other one, which should be this weekend really. And I started on this face and this is where I'm at right now. And I just plan on continuing to add the hair on top here and then the rest of the face on the bottom and around the side. And I should be posting about this one pretty shortly here as well.
Well, how do your professors react to your art? Because it's like, I'm sure not every single person in that school knows how to crochet on the level that you do.
Although there are a few that do. I met someone who I now go to school with and I'm friends with, through Instagram before I started going to school, and we became friends. And she actually just graduated this spring, but had a lot of connections. She actually worked in a gift shop at the school, and I really got the amazing chance to share more of my art with my school and the rest of my classmates and stuff, because she introduced my art to one of the head curators at the gallery of my school. And I had the opportunity to do a sort of hour-long lunch artist talk in front of my school, and shared some of my art there as well. So that was like probably one of the coolest experiences of my year so far, was talking about my artwork at school. So I know some people know about it, and I do know a lot of people there do crochet as a hobby in their free time, making clothing, especially in the fashion program.
Well,
But
I mean,
definitely not everyone.
on one hand, you're only 19. On the other hand, you've been doing it for over 7 years.
Yes.
How do you perceive yourself? Like, do you feel like you're an established artist? Do you feel like you're just scratching the surface?
That's really interesting that you asked that, because I feel that way all the time. And I see comments on my page all of the time that say, I've been crocheting for 60 years. I'm 80 years old and I've never seen anything like this. This is so cool. It's really awesome to see young people doing this. Like, I'm so glad that you decided to crochet. And I see comments like that and I'm like, that's really awesome to see. And it's weird to think that I've now been crocheting for like 7 years as well. Like, somehow I have established myself within crocheting, I'd say. At least I feel very confident in my abilities, and I know that not everyone can do what I do, but I still don't know what my future looks like. And I do think that I am sort of just scratching the surface of where I'll be. Hopefully with social media, I'll continue to grow and be able to share more of my art and really just continue to create, because that's just really what I've loved to do since the beginning, is not necessarily working for other people, but doing it for myself. And just, I have boxes and boxes and boxes of crocheted animals just that I started crocheting for myself when I was 12, because I thought it was fun. And I never really had any intention of selling them. And I still really can't, because the patterns and the designs are all copyrighted, but that's why I was doing it. It was just sort of for fun, really.
Well, like, there is this whole thing about people being knit worthy, crochet worthy. Is there like ever an expectation from family, from friends, that like, you like doing it anyway, why won't you make me something?
I definitely, all the time, I get comments like, oh, you could just make this shirt for me. Oh, you could just like do this for me because you know how to crochet. Like, oh, can you make me this? I saw it on Instagram. It's super cute. And I'm like, as much as I would love to do that, like, obviously I love making things for people, even though I'm sort of just crocheting for myself still. I just really think like, if I took on every single project that everyone ever asked me to do, I would never have any time to crochet anything else. Like, I feel like I hardly have enough time already, let alone if I was making shirts and animals and everything every week. So as much as I love that people ask me, and I know that I have made up stuff for quite a bit of people in my family and friends, I just know that I really can't do everything.
Are you good at saying no?
Yeah. Not really. I am good at making excuses, though, if that's a good thing.
Well, sometimes that's what you have to do, you know.
Yep, totally.
Not everybody needs to have a stuffed animal for Christmas. They can have something store-bought, you know.
Yeah, and now that I've become more busy doing portraits and stuff, I know that I have less and less time around Christmas as well to crochet animals and gifts. So sorry, friends and family, it's gonna start being gift cards and stuff instead of animals, I guess.
Well, I mean, you know how like you're talking about using recyclable materials in your art and like being conscious about the environment and all that stuff. Are you considering getting yourself completely self-made wardrobe in the future?
I would totally love to. Now that I know how to sew and do all of that, although we do typically use one sort of size for everything in class, it's more of like the industry standard for fashion. I'm not creating clothes for myself most of the time, but I think I would could be capable of doing so in the future for sure.
I mean, like, what gives you more joy, sewing or crocheting?
I hate to say crocheting because I'm going to school for fashion, but it really is crocheting still. I still love learning new hobbies, and that's why over the course of the past 2 years, it's been really awesome to pick up sewing and learn so much about fashion and be capable of constructing a shirt even just like this with the collar and buttons and separating pieces and all of that. But at the end of the day, I'm definitely going to sit down with my yarn instead of a sewing machine.
I mean, do you feel like you're living a dream because you going to school for what you love, you doing on the side art that brings you joy? Are you living a dream?
I think so. I think when I was choosing where to go to college, I was more focused on going to a university, and I applied to a lot of universities, and I didn't even apply to the school that I am currently going to at first because I was so focused on living the sort of structured college life where I get a science or math or business degree and go have a real world job, and I can still crochet in my free time or whatever. But I think that making decisions to go to art school and study fashion and continue pursuing crochet really was the right decision for me. And even though I don't know where I'm going to end up in a few years, I really do feel confident that I'm on the right track for me.
Does it scare you, like the unknown part of it, the fact that like when you're an artist, you're on your own, sort of like there is no 9-to-5 job and there is no guaranteed pay?
It's totally scary, but I do think I have the sort of drive in me just from being able to keep up with posting on Instagram for years and continuing to crochet, even if a lot of my friends are texting me that they're going to bed or just hanging out watching TV or playing a game. I'm like, sorry guys, I have to be crocheting. I would love to watch that show, but I really shouldn't waste 4 days of my life binging this show. If I have 4 days of free time, I should be crocheting.
Well, is there like a guilty pleasure, something that you do to spoil yourself?
I hate to say it, but it's probably sitting on my phone. I am just a 19-year-old. I'm on every social media, and I'm sure I waste way too much time on my phone. And I think it is a guilty pleasure. Like, I always have it on me. If I'm crocheting, I'll crochet for 5 minutes, take a break to scroll through something, and then pick it back up again. And I wish I didn't do that, but I do think it can be my like miniature break from crocheting all the time.
Well, I wish you the very best in school, in your art. That
I
is
really appreciate it.
And I love having you on my channel. I love getting to know you.
Yeah, I seriously love to talk about what I do, just to be able to share crocheting with just about everyone. It really has been amazing my favorite part of what I do is talking to people online and seeing other people react to what I do, just because it is such a positive world of crochet.
Well, we're gonna put all the links to you, all your
Yes,
TikTok, all
that's
your
good.
Instagram and everything
Mhm.
under the description of this video, so people can find you and follow you. And you know,
Really
I
awesome.
would
I
I
appreciate
would
it.
love to see what else you create, and like I would, you know.
I'll definitely be creating. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Will. Thank you for being guest of my channel today.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on.